Now to Ms. Mace, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things before I start with some questions. First, I'd like to enter into the record this editorial by the Charleston Post and Courier that I quoted from this morning about property being seized without bringing charges.
Without objection.
And then secondly, I thought I was on the FAIR Act already. Apparently I'm not, so you can add one more Republican to that great bipartisan bill.
That's very good news, without any objection there, too.
Right. And then third, I'll start with Ms. Harris and then go to Mr. Albin. Ms. Harris, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing your personal story. So many voices don't have the opportunity to share those stories, and it takes courage to do that, and we thank you for being here today, going through everything you went through from losing your son to losing your vehicle. So my first question goes to you. Were you ever charged with a crime in this particular incident?
Not only was I never charged with a crime, I was never even accused of a crime, except for when they told them if I didn't hand over the keys that they could then have held me accountable also. Other than that, that's the only thing that ever happened.
Thank you. I think many Americans would be just surprised and shocked to hear that your assets, your car, your house, your cash could be seized without ever being charged, let alone convicted of a crime. What impact did losing your car for that period of time have on you, your family, and work?
Right. Like I said, it was in the middle of winter. So I was on public transportation in the middle of winter, and I had to pretty much grocery shop. Everything had to be done on the bus system, and at my age, that was not a very pleasant or easy thing to do, but you do what you have to.
Right.
And I forgot to state that, which I think is very important, is that not only did they take my car, they kept my car for 5 years before they even start any type of form of forfeiture action. I hadn't heard anything about that car for 5 years. That's a long time.
So technically you didn't have the vehicle for 6 years. It sounds
yes,
like.
correct.
Okay, six and a half years without a vehicle. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then I'd like to talk to Mr. Albin and talk about some of the experiences that you have. And first, thank the Goldwater Institute for stepping up and helping you too, Ms. Harris. But can you give some examples, Mr. Albin, of innocent activities that that your clients or potential clients have been involved in that led to their property being seized via civil asset forfeiture where they were never charged with a crime?
Absolutely. Usually the activity that people are engaged in is traveling, either driving, say, across the country, across the state, or flying. I recently represented a gentleman from the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans whose name was Kermit Warren. He's a metal scrapper and until the COVID pandemic was the shoe shine man at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans. He and his son both lost their jobs because of the COVID pandemic, and were looking to try to provide for themselves by expanding their metal scrapping business. To make that effective, they needed a second truck. And so Mr. Warren located a tow truck that fit his specifications in Ohio. He flew to Ohio to inspect that truck, decided it wasn't actually quite what they needed, and on his way back, was stopped at the airport by the DEA and had the $28,180 that he had with him to buy the tow truck seized from him. That was his entire life savings, and it left him destitute for over a year. That seizure happened last November. He finally got his money back just before Thanksgiving this year, over a year later. He was never charged with any crime, nor was his son, and his money has now been fully returned, but his life was made miserable for a year because DEA suspected that a black man flying through an airport with $28,000 must be up to no good. That's just one of many, many examples. I'd be happy to provide others, but I don't want to take up your time.
Yeah, and how do we de-incentivize some of this behavior? What other proposals are out there? We have the FAIR Act, but what are some things, small parts that would make a big difference in this larger conversation?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that we separate the financial incentive so that law enforcement doesn't stand to directly benefit from the seizures that they're making. Those DEA officers that stopped Mr. Warren at the airport and took money from him, they don't get to put that money directly in their pockets, but you better believe they get promotions based on how much money they seize. They get evaluated based on how much money they seize because they're part of a airport interdiction program, and that interdiction program exists to take money away from travelers. We need to put an end to those sorts of programs, and the best way to do that is to make sure that the money that is taken through civil forfeiture goes to the general fund and not to the DOJ Assets Forfeiture Fund or the Treasury Forfeiture Fund, which are funds that can only be spent by law enforcement and are controlled by law enforcement. That's the fundamental thing that drives all of this abuse.
And thank you. And I'm reminded, Mr. Chairman, having this conversation, talking about people using cash. When my kids were toddlers, I bought my first minivan for $14,000, and I showed up with cash, not even thinking that what the consequences could be. So thank you for sharing that, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I knew of another case like this where an older Chinese-American gentleman had saved up, I think it was around $40,000 in order to purchase a restaurant, and he was driving to Louisiana and got stopped and the money was seized. It took him many years, I think with the help of the Institute of Justice, to get the money back. All right, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.